All righty. So I am very fortunate today. It is an extraordinary honor to welcome someone whose work has shaped not only the modern psychedelic renaissance, but the way millions of people around the world think about consciousness, healing, creativity, and human potential. Dr. James Fadiman is a psychologist, author, educator, and one of the true pioneers of psychedelic science. With more than 6 decades of involvement in psychedelic research, he has become one of the most respected and influential voices in the field. He earned his bachelor's degree from Harvard University before completing both his master's and PhD in psychology at Stanford. During the groundbreaking years of the 1960s, Dr. Fadiman conducted pioneering research exploring how psychedelics could enhance creativity, problem solving, and human performance. His early work took place alongside many of the visionary who helped define the emerging fields of humanistic and transpersonal psychology. And throughout his career, he has remained committed to studying consciousness with both scientific rigor and profound humility. He's one of the founders of the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, now known as Sophia University, helping establish one of the first graduate institutions devoted to the scientific study of consciousness, spirituality, and human transformation. For many people entering the psychedelic world, Dr. Fadiman's landmark book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, Safe, Therapeutic, and Sacred Journeys, has become essential reading. Since its publication in 2011, it has served as a gold standard for preparation, safe use, navigation, and integration of psychedelic experiences, helping countless clinicians, researchers, guides, and explorers approach these medicines with wisdom, responsibility, and respect. More recently, together with Jordan Gruber, Jim has considered the definitive research on psychedelic microdosing. His book, Microdosing for Health, Healing, and Enhanced Performance. This comprehensive work synthesizes years of research, thousands of participant reports, and practical guidance exploring the potential of sub-perceptual doses of psychedelics for emotional well-being, cognitive flexibility, creativity, physical health, performance, while carefully distinguishing anecdotal evidence from emerging scientific research. His contributions extend far beyond psychedelics. He's also the co-author of numerous influential books, including Your Symphony of Selves, which explores the richness and multiplicity of human identity, as well as works on transpersonal psychology, optimal functioning, personal development. What has always distinguished Jim's work is that he reminds us psychedelics are never simply about the molecules themselves. They are invitations into deeper relationship with ourselves, with one another, and with the living world. His approach consistently emphasizes preparation, intention, integration, ethics, humility, and the cultivation of wisdom alongside scientific inquiry. Jim, thank you for spending your time today. It is a true privilege to welcome you on Conversations with Dr. Wes.
That was just terrific. I thought
Awesome.
I need a copy of that to leave for whoever writes my obituary. That was just wonderful.
Well, we were just talking, and, Jim, I'm just so delighted that you were here today. I'll tell you a quick story. I had gone and, I'm a counselor, have my PhD in consciousness and society from the University of West Georgia. Humanistic, person-centered, funky, experiential, music, arts, eclectic. But I had done some of my own plant medicine work, and I had made my way out to Arizona and worked with the sacred plant medicine peyote. And on my return, flight home back to Atlanta, I downloaded your book on microdosing and read it on the plane in an hour. Just knocked it out and was blown away. And I had known about you, but I was very interested in microdosing. And then I went to find a physical copy of your book at Barnes & Noble, found it, but also stumbled on Dr. Stacy Simmons' book, Mushroom Pharmacy. Picked them both up, dived in, asked Stacy to come on the podcast. She agreed. And I said, man, it's probably a super long shot. There ain't no way I'm hearing back from Jim Fadiman. but I'm going to throw it out to the universe, send an email. And sure enough, you got back to me and here we are, man. So I'd love for you to just dive in and tell our listeners a little bit about your work, where you're currently at. And, you know, I'm curious to kind of get your read on everything you see happening in the field with the advancement of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and all of the growth, this kind of psychedelic renaissance we're in, because this is not new territory for you, but how culture is picking it up and kind of moving it is very interesting. So with that, I'll be quiet and let you lead the way.
Well, I love that story. I kind of, there you are, fresh off your peyote experience, and you're reading about microdosing, which is like the total other possible end of psychedelic use. There you are, this giant eagle full of your consciousness. You've been back reintroduced to the way, at least we know, like 9,000 years of high doses. And here is this book that says, well, if you're willing to kind of get some improvements without any visual changes, without any super interesting things happen, no thousand angels open up and say, you're back, you're back. Okay? And what did you get from microdosing? Well, I'm sleeping better. I'm nicer to my kids and so forth. It's a very different world. And let me just throw in, one of the things about science is errors last just as long as information. Okay. And somebody, and we were not going to mention who it is, came up with a description of microdosing effects as sub-perceptual, as if they're not perceivable. Okay. Now, you're looking at the person that did it. Okay. And he's really sorry. What he wanted to do was find a word that wouldn't offend him. And sub-hallucinogenic was horrible because hallucinogenic has nothing to do with anything with psychedelics. Sub-psychedelic sounded too much like it's a small hit, not a big hit, but it's the same hit. It's kind of one spoon of ice cream is still ice cream. So it's perceptual in that people say, I look forward to the days when I dose. I feel better during those days. Do I have any visual distortions? No. Do I have any visionary experiences? No. But do I have a lessening of the migraine I've had for 6 years? Oh, yes. Have I stopped taking SRIs after 20 years? Oh, yes. So it has amazingly powerful effects, but perceptual, not really. And an early friend of mine who, when I was like in my second year, maybe of thinking of microdoses, says, oh yeah, that's a nice term for them. I've been doing that for 10 years. And then she sent me a long description of what worked for her. And it's mainly that her creativity was up and a lot of other things. And she said, the only way that anyone would know I was on anything is if they looked at my computer and I turned down the illumination a little. Okay, so we're talking small physical changes, major shifts, however, in every physical system. And the other thing to keep in mind that almost all the higher dose work that we've been very excited by for the last maybe 10 years, how can I say it? It's been almost all psychological, mental illness, so forth. And microdosing probably is going to have it has its major effects in that it doesn't suggest that something is only good for the mind. And we now know some really silly theories came up early that somehow this substance, which goes to every cell of the body, only affects one kind of neuron in the brain. And we've all seen the pictures of the brain before psilocybin, and it's got a few colored lines, and after it's got a lot of colored lines. So if I'm a scientist, I look at that and I say, my God, it causes colored lines. and what they were saying is it improves communication between parts of the brain. Now, how could it do that if it's only affecting one little neuron? By the way, more of those neurons are actually in your gut than in your brain. So if it
Yeah.
only affected that one neuron, um, it's a whole different world. But finally, they figured out you can't find where it goes because you don't have a way of tracking it. But if you take the molecule and you put another little molecule on it, turns out from a very strong toxin that they can watch, they basically could see where it went. And where it goes in the brain is everywhere. Okay. And then a more recent study said, well, could it go anywhere but the brain? Because all of these incredible things, and also we love to study the brain because it's really hard. And it turns out if you can knock out the effects of it in the brain, lots of other things happen, because you may have noticed there's a lot of other systems that aren't your brain. Okay. If you stub your toe, yeah, your brain lets you know it's pain, but your toe is actually got a lot more to say than that. So we're starting, the science is fairly weak. The science of results, of experience, of individuals reporting how their lives and bodies have changed, that's quite strong. So that's where we are.
Yeah. And Jim, I want to jump in and say, first and foremost, I think the distinction that you made between macro doses and micro doses, this term integration gets thrown around a lot, which is how do we take any psychedelic, mystical, consciousness expansive experiences that may be so profound and powerful and integrate them into the tapestry of our lives on a day-to-day basis. And that's where the microdosing kind of comes into play, where it can be this bridge for deep amounts of integration, and to your title, for healing, for sleep, for psychological and physiological. What's always been interesting to me, Jim, has been I don't know if you're familiar with Gregory Bateson's work.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so Bateson, is the man to me, and his daughter Nora Bateson and her work on warm data. But this idea of these things aren't separate, but we've made them separate: the mind, the body, the immune system, the endocrine system, our nervous system. It's like a symphony. They work together, and there's no way to extract or pull them apart from one another. And that's where, psilocybin becomes very interesting, because again, like you said, the scientific study is we're like, hey, it's working on the 5-HT2A receptor. And it's like, well, that is one measurable piece, but it is working with the symphony. And in many ways, it seems to be a conductor and able to, orchestrate and blend. And so, yeah, my hope, I talk to my wife all the time, who's in more of the spiritual realm, studying meridians, chakras, Ayurvedic sciences, and we hope for a spirit science, kind of this blend. We need the woo-woo cats to start speaking neuroscience, and we need the neuroscientists to start speaking a little bit more woo-woo. And if we can get that spirit science going, I think that some beautiful things can happen.
Well, science, science has declined in its really validity. Let's go back a little bit. It's kind of fun. How did science get started in the West? Aside from Arabic science and Chinese science, which way it predates it, let's go to the West, because they didn't know about anybody else. And in the 1660s, they formed a little society in London, really a boys' club, called the Royal Society. And the Royal Society had a slogan. If they had T-shirts, they'd all be wearing them, which says, "Don't accept authority." Which they were saying in that point, the church doesn't own truth. Truth is only owned by looking at it, observing it, counting it, measuring it, and asking other people about it. And they decided all of reality could be one of two groups for their point of view, which is trying to understand it. There was stuff, or objective science, which is, how much does my mouse weigh? Okay. You and I don't have to argue. We can go to a neutral third party and every time it measures my mouse, it'll get the same thing. And no matter what our opinion is, and whether human beings should be using something named after an animal, so all that goes away. Okay. And that's really easy. And they said, and then there's the other group called subjective science. And subjective science, from their point of view, was what people experience. And the only way it could be measured is to say to the person, what was that like? How did that feel? How hot did you think that was? When did you get tired, etc.? And they never assumed that you would want to talk about this group the same way you talk about that group. So, but science kind of moved and said, where's the money going? Where are the cool people going? I remember a wonderful guy was looking around the university, and he was deciding what he was going to do with his career. And he saw the new physics building and the biochemistry building and the biology building. And the psychology was off in a building along with ancient languages and other stuff that didn't need or benefit from any of this high-tech, high salary, high career. So psychology said, let's pretend we're a science. Creep across the campus measuring things and making experiences down to numbers. And nobody really bought it. Okay, so if you I remember when transpersonal psychology was trying to get accepted by the American Psychological Association, and then they had a clinical program. It was a really strong clinical program. And they said, we'd like it listed as one of your clinical programs because we're all APA members. You know, we all have cool degrees. And this letter came back that in about 7 pages said, you must be kidding. And it was all very straight. And no, we don't think we will accept you. And then there was a long paragraph clearly written by lawyers because there was no reason to turn them down on all their criteria. The criteria that transpersonal was refused on is you're studying things that make us look like we're not science. And therefore, we don't want you in the family. And that's pretty much still today. So if you go into a bookstore, spiritual and transpersonal takes up a lot of shelves. And then over here is the self-help books. And then there's a teeny little thing on psychology. So it's similar in a way, and when we get into psychedelics, psychedelics kind of is the other side of that, which is everything important about psychology is in the subjective group. You know, did you really see Jesus in your experience? How tall was he? No. Wait a moment. Did he look like the other Jesuses? Here we're giving you a set of slides, and you're to pick the one. We don't do that because we know that's kind of silly, but there's a lot of scientific papers that look like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we notice, and what I've noticed, I've written books, I've given a lot of speeches. People later say, I don't remember anything you said, but that one story. Okay. We actually learn from each other by experience. So microdosing and our book is basically a couple of hundred stories, and in between there's quote research. But research, and this is probably research is second. This is what the people in England were saying. Until you have something to research, which is experience, you obviously aren't going to do it. So if you see a research paper on a psychedelic experience and what it's good for anorexia or something, someone actually had experience enough to convince you, the scientist, that it was worth studying. And you were able to convince the funder that they would get something out of it. So science comes with 2 gates. One is, my colleague's going to still talk to me. And 2 is, can I get money for it? So yes. At one point I was working with the Department of Psychology at Yale, and they were doing some wonderful LSD research and some wonderful other other work in consciousness, but it was all couched in terms of how it was probably bad for you. And I said, what's going on? She says, all of our funding is from those parts of the government that study how bad drugs are. So there's a lot of cultural things going on, and which is why psychedelics still is, now that we're in this renaissance of research, what percentage of the population that uses psychedelics has been in a research study? Okay. And I was, Rick Dobbin and I, head of MAPS, were doing something in a general drug conference in Denver. And we had a room to talk about the future of psychedelic research. And there was like, I don't know, 300 or 400 people. And I said, how many of you have not had a psychedelic experience of some sort? And one poor guy in the back, okay? I said, how many of you have been in a research study? A little, couple of people, okay? I said, how many of you are going to be probably having a psychedelic experience of some sort in the next year? Almost everybody. How many of you will be doing that in a research setting? A couple, okay? So you had to look at the reality of where were we getting our evidence from? And so that when someone says, well, that's an anecdote, I said, wait a moment, that's what you say about comedians when they do a sketch. How about that's a report? Well, and it turns out that science is full of people whose whole parts of psychological research are based on people's reports, not on anything else. Now, for example, you're a therapist. What physiological measures do we have to determine if someone is depressed or not?
Yeah.
None.
Zero.
What is the most, not popular, it's the wrong word, the most prevalent mental illness on the planet?
Depression.
Okay. How many drugs are there to treat depression? Like
Countless. Psychiatric, psychotropic, yeah.
Right. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. How are they measuring effectiveness?
Self-report.
Yeah, they ask you, right? And it's not very effective. Why is it not very effective? Maybe because if you treat a mental condition with a physical solution, it may not be enough of an overlap to actually work well. So that's kind of how I started looking at the world I was moving into when I started finding out what people were getting from microdosing. And let me give an overall kind of simple way of expressing all of the different conditions that have been affected by microdosing. It makes the body, mind work more effectively. Period. And you say, well, how can that be? And you say, well, if it goes to every cell and it has certain basic traits such as anti-inflammatory, that's on the physical level. And it encourages the regeneration and new growth of healthy, both mind and physical cells. And probably, since there's a massive amount of our psychology, which is in our biome, that we have no idea what's going on, it has to affect that too. So we're looking at something that seems to make the system work better. And if I look at almost any medication, I say, is that good for everybody? And they say, no, it's not good for everybody. How about why do you say microdosing seems to be, more than that? I say, well, is anything good for everybody? No. Well, how about sleep? Well, that's good for everybody. How about improving your diet? Well, that's good for everybody. How about better relationships? Well, that's really good for everybody. Okay, so there's a group of things that are good for everybody. How about what we call vitamins? Why do we call it a vitamin? Because it seems to affect the system, not I don't take a vitamin if I have a torn ligament, okay? Except if I'm taking a vitamin that helps everything work. So there's a whole class of things that are basically make the system work better. And since we are kind of really healing machines, And if we weren't self-healing, none of us would, get to our first year. So here is microdosing that seems to improve overall function. Well, I'm sleeping well. Is microdosing going to improve my sleep? Probably not. Okay. But I have neuropathy. Will it help that? Oh, probably. How about migraine, headaches? And then you say, do you know what causes migraine headaches? And they say, no. And then I say to a professor of neuropsychology, do you know what causes headaches? And after a minute or two, no. Okay. He said, okay, but here's something that makes them better. Do you know how that works? No. Are you going to prevent anyone using it because you don't know how it works? And very often there's a hesitation. Because in the world of pharmaceuticals, one of the rules that the US government's come up with is you can't sell it until you can tell us the mechanism. Well, if I don't know the mechanism, I know how to write as if there was one. And I'll give you a little secret, okay?
Yeah.
None of the rest of you should listen. When you're looking up things, as I do a lot, and it says, what causes this, okay? And it says genetic and environmental factors. Now, you know what that means? It means we have the faintest idea what it is. That's literally what it means. Because what they're saying is we don't have any idea, and everything is caused by environmental and genetic factors if you kind of realize that you've just been, fooled by your scientists. And so when I read this in these peer-reviewed papers, I think, okay, I understand what the game is. I understand about publications. I support people getting, making a living doing science. And I also am comfortable with the kind of gamey words that are used to prove it's a real science.
Yes.
But what I found in my work is that isn't the way the body works, and that isn't the way experience works.
Absolutely.
And yeah. I'm just thinking of a physician who had cancer, and he took apricot pits, and he took whatever he was working with Stanford, and he had sciencey stuff, and he was taking 10 different things. And he was a very serious physician, a very smart guy, and he got better. And I said to him, what do you think worked? And he looked at me and he said, I don't care. Okay. So when I approached microdosing, what interested me was not the mechanism, not the physiology, not the biochemistry, but did people find it beneficial? In what way, or not in what way? And what made it work better and what made it work not as well? So it was all based on what I would call reality testing, which is the ultimate decision. When you're making a pharmaceutical, you spend $100 million, and you have double-blind studies that prove something. One of the things that you'll find is that real people don't like double-blind studies. See, members, I have a wonderful, super high-ranked physiological physician, MD, PhD, who once put in print that he doesn't really believe anything until there's a double-blind study. And I thought, I know people exactly like you, only they say, is it in the Bible? And I think both of them are making a serious error.
Yes.
And one of the things I know, imagine you go to your physician, you have a condition, and he says, you're very fortunate. There's a new drug that's come in. It seems to be really wonderful and working for your condition. And let me get a bottle. And he comes out with a bottle without a label, and he gives you some. And he said, oh, by the way, I'm only giving half of my patients are getting the real drug. The other half of my patients are getting a placebo, and I can't tell you which you are.
Oh.
And please just pay pay the person at the front as you go out. We don't do that. So the real proof is not in the double-blind study. The proof is in the does someone benefit from it? You say, well, maybe they benefit from it because they believe in it. Yes, that's how the body works.
Yes.
If you have a friend and he says, I went to this really good restaurant, I think you'll like it. When you enter that restaurant, what are you geared to have happen? You're geared to look for things that are going to work. They're going to be tasty and so forth. Similarly, if your friend says, oh, I see that you're in this conference and there's going to be this dinner, see if you can kind of maybe ask for something different because I've eaten there a couple of times. The food's terrible. Okay. You're going to enter with a totally different expectation. So what we're learning is double-blind studies not only are not representative of reality, but they also lower the effectiveness of whatever is actually going on.
Yes. And Jim, not only that, beautifully spoken, it makes me think of Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, Biology of Belief.
Yeah.
And this idea that, again, science for so long is wanting to discount these other nuanced complexities of mind, body, physiology, psychology, gastrointestinal, all the ways that orchestra is operating, and not wanting to look at things like the bioenergetic field. And like you said, all of the ways that healing, even if we go back to the biopsychosocial model and looking at that Venn diagram, it's still wanting to kind of create these separations. But I almost feel like we've been lied to. I have to sit with clients and go, look, yes, you are a biological entity, and yes, you have a biochemistry and a neurology, but it doesn't just change when you take a medication. You're influencing and impacting your biochemistry all the time through epigenetics, through your sleep, through diet, through nutrition, through your psychology, whether you're meditating or not, emotions, thoughts. And we're having to change that epistemological paradigm through which we even understand how we operate. And I think you beautifully spoke to it.
Yeah, well, so the Western science has a lot of problems. One of it is a worship of Western science. Okay.
Yeah.
But that happens in every religious system. Eventually, they say, in order to keep people coming, I have to say mine is better than yours. Unless I am from a very advanced tradition like Buddhism, which says, you want to be a Catholic? Yeah, you be a Buddhist Catholic. Buddhism's about understanding reality. It's not about what books you read. So there we are, and we're now in the midst of what's called the Renaissance, where we are slowly rediscovering the ancient arcane work that some of us did a number of years ago. So it's less Renaissance-y for us, and it's a little bit nostalgic.
Well, and I imagine, Jim, that's got to be such a wild ride. I just did a 6-hour approved continuing education on psychedelic assisted psychotherapy.
Really?
And yes, and I got it approved by the licensed professional counselors of Georgia. Had about 10 to 15 counselors come out, and they were hungry to learn. But I went through the entire history, and I went to the 50s and the 60s and all the beautiful work that was being done, and the burgeoning psychedelic research. And then, of course, my dear favorite is Ram Dass, Richard Alpert. His journey, man, I'm just like, he's the homie. Everything he spoke was such beautiful truth for me. But to watch him and Timothy Leary and their work, Rick Doblin is another hero of mine, and you as well. And I just can't but fathom that it had to feel so deflating to watch this. It was the stage was set for us as a humanity to move into the healing. And then talk to me about that prohibition period and that turn that kind of happened where they just cut it off at the knees, man. And then there was MK Ultra and all of the other things that were going on. And most people don't understand that history, and they have no idea that we were right at the precipice. And then the rug got pulled out from underneath all psychedelic research.
Well, the history, if you read just the top line, said in such and such a date, there was a legislation passed in the United States which created these Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4 that we now have, a way of classifying drugs by some criteria. And the top criteria was set Schedule 1, which is you shouldn't research it, you can't give it to anybody, and it has no known medical benefit. Now, when psychedelics were added to that, they added an invisible ink, a codicil, and any goddamn thing we want to throw in there is fine. Okay. Now, why did they throw psychedelics in there? Okay. There were not only was there medical use, there was 25 years of research in Europe. There were 40,000 people in the United States who'd had basically psychedelic therapy sessions. The total death among those people was 0, and so forth. Well, because President Nixon was very clear, he really didn't like people who, one, didn't like him. We have other presidents that have that. And he didn't like people that didn't like Vietnam War. There were a lot of those. And he couldn't arrest people for not liking him or for not liking his policies. But if there was some activity they did, and he could make that activity illegal, it would allow him then, if not to arrest people, to investigate them, to wiretap them, so forth. So who didn't he like? Okay. He didn't like Jews. He didn't like blacks. And he really didn't like hippies. Now, in common, those three had, a lot of them, especially the hippies, were against the war. So this piece of legislation, which was not read by anybody practically in Congress, Kennedy, who was in the Senate, complained about it, but that was about it. No physician, no physiologist, no epidemiologist, no prison, nobody who had any scientific background at all about these things had anything to do with that legislation. Okay, I think we now, it's kind of the way Trump now uses executive orders that he makes up.
Yes.
Well, and the Congress, as we know, passes a lot of them without saying a word. Imagine we're back now, and here's imagine right now there's 250 psychedelic churches. Okay. What if we passed a law that said it's okay to have every religion in the United States, except if it's a psychedelic church? So that'd be similar to what happened then. And the other thing is, America said to many of its allies, we'd really like you to pass something similar to that. That's kind of like the mafia boss says, I'd really like you to invite my daughter to your party.
Yeah.
Okay? So the US said, we'd really like you, and we don't want to say what we might do if you don't, but it'd be really great if you signed this treaty of making medicines that have a 5,000 to 9,000 year track record bad. Okay, so the 60s, I was doing research the day that 60 projects in the United States all were stopped by a letter from the government. Mm. Ours went one day longer because when the letter arrived, our little team had 4 senior scientists from Silicon Valley lying on our couches and on mats on the floor, about to be brought up into full consciousness and told that they could work now on the problem that had most tormented them scientifically for the past few months. And this would be their opportunity to work on that project. Okay, so our little team kind of goes in a side office. I'm very much the youngest of the team, and I open the letter from the government. Ooh. And it says, as of the receipt of this letter, your research is canceled. And I looked at my sober, much higher degreed and wisdom and experienced friends and said, I think we got this letter tomorrow. Mm. And we agreed that was probably true. And we went back into our room with the people we were working with. And we then closed down the research project. And that particular creativity project now is talked about a lot. It's kind of been brought back to life and said, oh, you weren't using it therapeutically. No, we were using it to allow the system to function better. And these people had really good brains that they thought could function better. They said, okay, so here we are. And what's really exciting is the research, microdosing at least, is starting now to catch up with what people are doing all over the planet. So again, if you're a pharmaceutical, nobody gets to use it until you're able to sell it.
Right.
Psychedelics, it's the other way around, okay? Which is really, it's kind of, what are you guys using it for? Oh, I think we'll do research on that. Oh, we're doing anti-smoking research. Oh, it really works. Okay. Well, maybe then we can have a patent on something to do something that we already know works. It really is going to make it a lot easier on us. And while some people don't read the same things that you and I do, last week, Eli Lilly, biggest pharmaceutical company on the planet, just said to a little group working in England, the Beckley Foundation group, that we would like to buy the rights to a couple of molecules which are just like normal psychedelics with an extra little tail on them that comes off when you eat it. And we'll give you
5-MeO DMT.
Right, and we'll give you a couple of $1 billion. And we'll give you another $1 billion if the government goes along with it. And all of a sudden, friends of mine said, what happened? And what I said is, a couple of years ago, someone said to me, well, if psychedelics are so terrific and microdosing are even more terrific than that, why are no commercial pharmaceutical companies interested? And I thought that was a fair, I didn't know. And someone else, much smarter, said when any of these little teeny companies find a way to be profitable, one of the big companies will come in and buy the company. And I thought, I guess so. It's a very expensive way. But here's a company that says, hey, I bet they would have taken $2 billion, not 3. Okay. But now I'm finding out there were other companies actually, looking at it. Somebody figured out a way to make a profit from a psychedelic, and the game changed. Now, what do we know about this particular psychedelic? What's the most important feature of it if you're buying it, if your company's selling it? It doesn't take long.
Right.
Okay. And also, when people are on it, you can't really do any therapeutic intervention. So no skill necessary during that part of it. And then the rest of it's pretty optional because they're only buying the drug. They're not buying how to use it.
Right.
They're not selling the drug. So if you want to, it's like ketamine. You can go to the ketamine clinic and they say, okay, you're the 3 o'clock, you go in room 8. We'll be in a moment, give you the ketamine. There's a very comfortable chair in there. You have an hour and a half. There's another ketamine clinic that says, let's meet first for an hour and see why you're coming. And while you're under ketamine, we're going to be with you. And as you're coming out, we're going to work with you. That's choice.
Yep. And Jim, and like you said, so to kind of put some context for those listening, so this big purchase that happened for this molecule 5-MeO DMT, which is very distinct and different of an experience than DMT. And the intranasal delivery method of it. Like you said, what is healing and what helps people heal? My belief is that when there is preparation, there is a sacred soul present to witness, and then there is integration and weaving that into your life. And so now we kind of run the risk of the dangers of our Western values and how we function, which is, again, the quick fix. We're always looking for a way bigger, better, faster, stronger, um, advancing. And I think we miss something, especially with these ancient cultural tools. So you look at the entheogenic plant medicines and their histories, whether it be ayahuasca, iboga, wachuma, peyote, psilocybin, Maria Sabina and her sacred work, and how, the Wassons came and put that on Life magazine and in the 50s. And I think, for me, my hope is that as we advance and we start to give more access to psychedelics, that people can remember it's about connection. It's about connection to self, to community, to mind body connection to the earth ecologically, to start to see health as this connective tissue, almost like the mushrooms and the mycelium are, they're healthy because they're connected and they're working together in collaboration. And I just think, that was one of my criticisms of ketamine was, it's disassociating. So yes, it can help people, and I've seen it help people, and I've gone and sat with over 20 clients as they've done ketamine infusions, because that is the only FDA approved right now, and I'm in Georgia. But in my opinion, the difference between ketamine and psilocybin is helping you feel and associate and work through and move into emotions. So the only time I've had negatives show up, quote unquote, for people who are microdosing is when I get people that have been so disconnected from their emotions that the microdosing makes them actually begin to feel, and they feel uncomfortable with what that state is. And they're like, I don't know, it started to make me anxious. But if they can stay on the microdosing long enough, it is a reconnection to self and a way to feel your emotions without disassociating from them, compartmentalizing them, repressing them, that's what our culture has kind of always done. So I'm curious, where are we headed, man? Where is this going to go, Jim? I'm 44 and I got two little daughters. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we're going to go in two directions. And what you said was, I sat with people with legal ketamine. Now, was that ketamine or was that the Johnson & Johnson product?
It was ketamine, and it was intravenous, because I have an anesthesiologist who's got a clinic, and he said, take this Spravato and throw it out the window. That ain't it.
Okay. So, right. And, yeah, there's the question of how do you put something into your life that you haven't been prepared for? And the answer is sometimes very well and sometimes not so well. So the reason I've liked microdosing, and for some years we really didn't have any facilitators, any coaches, any integration, but microdosing has such a very small physical effect. It's what I call the reward to risk ratio, which is, worst case is, say you're taking mushrooms and you get a little nauseous because the rest of the mushroom gets you. That's about it. And that's handled, by the way, by putting lemon juice on the powder. So here we had something that people could use pretty much as they chose, and some people, but what it didn't do is get you high. And now people have figured out that it didn't get you high, but it got you happier. And one of the uses of microdosing that will never get through the medical side is social. There are places now where you go to a party and there's no alcohol, but there's a bunch of little chocolates. And some years ago, we're talking now some years ago, there was an article out of Los Angeles that people were using microdoses at weddings rather than alcohol. And most of us can remember a wedding where one of the guests had too much. Okay, mother of the bride. I mean, it's, terrible stories, and everybody looks the other way and so forth. These alcohol-free weddings were designed so that people's feeling good would be all they got, because that's all they were looking for. And it was just once, and microdosing has very little effect just once. And when they went home, they could drive, and so forth and so on. So there's a level of lack of big effects that people are beginning to understand is a feature, not a bug. And what we're seeing when people, I'm thinking now of someone who, this is someone who is a methadone addict, and I mean serious. The last time before working with a microdose coach, he had managed to lose his job, his house, and he was basically having to live in, kind of in the basement of his parents. And he's not a child. Well, what he's saying is when he's been microdosing, what he's found was the reason that that methadone could capture him for addiction is he didn't really like what he saw when he looked inside at himself. And he found in microdosing that he was likable. And the last note I've seen is, I love really loving myself. It makes all the difference in the world. And what I notice is I don't have any urge to go back to meth.
Wow.
Now, remember, this is microdose only. Okay, it's not even a disassociative. It's an associative, if we can make up that term, an associative where you get back in touch with the part of you that was never ill, the part of you that never got abused, the part of you that that when you go hug a tree, you and the tree are kind of on the same wavelength, the part of you that dogs will like. They're real good clinical tests if you like yourself, at least some. So it doesn't fit the medical model. It doesn't fit the insurance model. So if you go to the FDA and you say, I understand illness and that you have a whole system handling that. What are the categories of wellness? The answer is we don't have any. How about you don't have any where people feel better and you kind of rank it and you do research on which kind of orange juice makes people feel better? Or is fish food really better than all other ice creams? And they say, well, actually, we don't do that kind of research. Well, who does? So we live in a funny culture.
Yes. And Jim, that's the piece that you bring up that's so interesting. You made me think about, the way I like to frame it, and I'll get emotional talking about it, man, because it's like, I come from a lineage in my family. My mom's got her master's in behavioral analysis. My grandmother's got her EDD in psychology from Vanderbilt. She became the dean at Charleston Southern before women were even allowed to practice psychology. That's why they made her get her EDD. The psych department was like, nope, we don't take any women. But I come from this lineage, and as much as I love psychology, I can see the dehumanizing. I can see the corrupt political system that existed, and it really is about reconnection. And like you said, microdosing, and in particular psilocybin, it's not giving you anything. It's helping you reconnect and heal what was never lost and never broken. And if I may, there's a beautiful little poem written by this spiritual cat, Jeff Foster, and it's called Unbreakable. And he says, you do not heal from trauma, and nobody heals you either. You simply reconnect with that sacred place in yourself that was never traumatized, never broken, never damaged in the first place. Your true self, absolute and ever present, innocent and free. It is not a destination. It is you, alive and awake in the moment. Know yourself as the absolute. Let all thoughts and feelings move through you, however tense or uncomfortable. The forms pass, they always pass, and you remain. You are not broken. You are unbreakable. And I think you talk about the addicted client, and here I was, master's, PhD. I ran a youth center for 5.5 years. I poured everything into it, and I became super neurotic towards the end. And I was a mind in turmoil and stressed, and the definition of Western neuroticism. And you know what healed me, brother? Going out to Arizona and working with this sacred cactus on 160 acres by myself, spirit and nature, and coming back and reading your damn book and starting to go, you know what? I'm going to start microdosing. And here I am going, how is this illegal? And how are we not, so I'm sitting here in Georgia, and my hope is, fingers crossed, that we get some FDA approval for psilocybin and MDMA, which I know is Doblin's work and MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. They've been working diligently to kind of get there. And then my work is going to continue to be, Jim, preparation, integration, being a holistic guide, being a humanistic healer, and just sitting with people as they do that journey work, trying to do risk reduction, harm reduction. And even, the integration piece is so important, because I'm having people who are showing up going, hey, I just went and did 3 ayahuasca retreats and 2 Bufo journeys, and I see everything and it's all freaking connected, but my family thinks I'm crazy and I can't ground for shit. And I'm going, okay, it's integration. And part of that, I think, is back to microdosing,
Well, what we know is bringing someone down is a different set of skills than giving something that'll get them up. Okay? And the wonderful thing about, what's interesting, you were at that particular place in Arizona where they give you some psychedelics and say, there's 160 acres out there, take care of yourself. Is that right?
Yep. They send you to a campsite overnight. You fast for 24 hours, and then you sit alone with the medicine all night.
And I have one of their beautiful ceramic cups. They make great ceramics. I don't know.
That's Mana. Yep. The Church of the Peyote Way, and Annie and Matt and Reverend Emmanuel Trulio.
And I asked them a long time ago, how do you deal with a local town? He said, well, and he mentioned all the major people in town that owned their ceramics. And they were part of the town because they were. And I love the way they said, here's your peyote. We'll see you in a couple of days. That's very different than the kind of, we're now giving you either a high dose of psilocybin synthetic, because the real stuff's too good, and don't worry, there's going to be 2 people and we both have degrees and we're going to be with you the whole time. Now, I confess, I don't know if I've ever said this publicly, when I was sitting for people during the morning when they were absolutely in their own world with headphones, and I brought something to read.
Yeah.
Okay, because I didn't want to disturb them. I was there, and if someone said, you go over there and you'd say, and he looks up at you and says, takes off the mask, says, I think I'm dying. Then the guide gets to do this wonderful thing that says, oh, that's great. And he sits next, you sit next to them, you hold their hand, and you say, it's not quite dying. And they go, okay. So microdose work is a very unusual kind of training. And I find people who are psychotherapists actually prefer to put people on lower doses of psychedelics where they can still be therapeutic, I mean, you still have an identity. And I was trained in transcendence, which is, yeah, you have an identity, but don't get caught in that.
Right.
What I realized, and unlike, I was not a licensed professional. I was a first-year graduate student, and I would think, after I had my own transcendent experience, I think, why did I come back to be a first-year graduate student? What a terrible place to be reborn. Because boy, talk about having no power in the world, and I had to be very careful when I was in graduate school not to say what I was really doing. It was still legal, but Stanford, where I was absolutely terrified they would become the Harvard of the West. It's one of their slogans of what Stanford was, because the culture didn't know what to do with it. So in a funny way, when Nixon made it all illegal, a part of the culture relaxed. because if it was bad, then they didn't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And we're now in the next round of that, where one of the questions that I'm almost always asked, and I certainly won't get it from you, is what are the real dangers of microdosing? It's like you can't, nobody says what are the real dangers of Coca-Cola, where there are real dangers. Nobody asks what are the dangers of coffee, because we haven't found any. Nobody says I hear you're going to go abroad, you're going to go to Paris. What are the dangers of going to, we don't do that. We start by saying, what are the benefits and how can we work with that? And yes, there are pickpockets in Paris and so forth and so on, but you don't start from the position of protection.
Yes.
Oh, you're going to go to Muir Woods with these 2,000-year-old trees. They can fall,
And Jim, it's so interesting. It makes me think of Terrence McKenna when he said, "What a shame to go through an entire life and not have a transcendent experience." But then also, dare I be so bold, I would say, what are the dangers of not microdosing?
Right. Well,
and
doesn't give you transcendent experience. It gives you a better version of you. I mean, basically, some mornings you wake up and you say, "Wee, I'm up. Things are good. Yes, I'm going to get something done today that I haven't done for a week." You may or may not do it, but you feel that. And maybe you go outside and at the moment I have a little bush called roses or Sharon. They're little white things. They're not really roses. And I think, wow, okay. If a microdose gives me that kind of feeling, it looks like it's worth having. If I also have benefits so that my the nerve pain I have from a car accident doesn't bother me as much, that's also terrific. Now, let me give you just the other side of it is now and then, and I'm kind of downplaying microdosing, now and then there are miracles. Okay. Now, a lot of miracles are in the book, but turns out when you publish a book, the miracles don't stop.
Mm.
So we actually, with the microdosing book, we have new editions coming out in Spain and in Brazil. And so we've sent them some appendices of new things, and I'll just share one of those with you because most people will know what I'm talking about. Okay, there's something called Tourette's syndrome. Okay, and we all saw a movie about it. Tourette's syndrome, guess what causes Tourette's syndrome? Okay, ready? Genetic, da da da.
Yes.
Okay, and it looks like a lot of children, maybe up to 3%, have something like Tourette's, and it goes away when they're quite young. It's a kind of momentary disturbance in something in your brain, and it comes out as physical tics. It may come out as little speech explosions. Unfortunately, we don't know why, swearing, and so forth. So we have a little website called microdosingbook.com, and you can tell us stories. So this guy tells the story of being diagnosed at about age 8 when it started to interfere with school. But he was assured, it would get better in a few years, and it didn't. It would get better when he was a teenager, and it didn't. It would get better in your 20s, it didn't. So he's in his 30s when he wrote to us, and he, independently of our work, finds microdosing. It's out there. It's dozens of websites and people talking. So he gets some psychedelics from somewhere, and he tries a microdose. And he says, an hour and a half later, I realized that the first time since I was 8 years old, I had an hour without Tourette's.
Mm.
Okay. And that hour stretched. Whatever dose he was taking, it would last him 24 hours, and then it would start to come back, and he'd take a microdose again. Now, fortunately for us, and maybe for him, he was what we call a citizen scientist. He paid attention, and what he noticed after a week or two, that it wasn't lasting 24 hours. It was lasting like 20. So he took it every 20 hours. because he had hours. His whole day was like you and I normally have. And it kept shrinking and it got down to 2 hours. And then it stopped working. Now, there's something in the literature called tolerance. We don't see it much in microdosing, but we weren't even totally sure it's true. And so he stops. And then he finds us and the research and so forth, and he writes that he's going to do it differently. Okay, and I tell him, you've done two wonderful things. One terrific and one you're sorry about. The terrific is, if you look up Tourette's, say in Wikipedia, and you get down to treatment, there's nothing. No therapy, no medication, no nothing. So very clean. And the other, that he has told us, he has proved tolerance. Okay. So he reads the book and we write back and forth, and he says, and actually I lost my job. I can't afford even the mushrooms. So he gets a new job. He crosses the country. He's reestablished. And I get a letter that says, the order arrived at 6:30 tonight. And I took some. He said at 9:30, I realized that I hadn't had a tick for the last hour, hour and a half. And he said, I still had what are called urges, which is when you're about to have a tick, your system says, we're about to do this. And he said, I could just put them down. So he and I are still in conversation of what's the best. And he's working it out at not taking it so often. And he's working how to handle better when he still has the feelings, but he's been getting control. So that's a miracle.
Yes, 1,000%. What a beautiful, I mean, just so profound.
Yeah.
From 8 years old. Yeah,
right.
From 8 years old, not having any moments, and then being able to have clarity and the ability to go without that for any length of time. Talk about a hope installation.
Yeah. So what it said to me is, well, Fadiman, you with your kind of smart ass stuff, and you're the big person on microdosing, and you've done this for 15 years. There's a lot you don't know. And isn't that wonderful?
And that's the humility and the beautiful part that I love, because you're in this to figure out the potentiality. And on that note, Jim, I wanted to ask you, so, on a personal side note, my oldest daughter, Story, who's 13, she has autism, different sensory challenges, but she also has a genetic deletion, something called 16p11.2 genetic deletion syndrome. On her 16th chromosome, there was a micro deletion. What a name.
Yeah. What a terrible name. What's wrong with you? Dad, nobody knows. I tell them.
Yes, I know. And but go ahead.
What is the how do you know that? I mean, how does she experience that?
So the genetic testing revealed that micro deletion. There's a lot of that they understand about it, a lot that they don't. She's beautiful, man. She's my teacher. I see the world through her lens, but it does create a lot of sensory issues, temperament. Kind of, she's not violent, but she'll definitely get really frustrated, overwhelmed, a lot of perseveration on certain things. But here's what's the ass kicker, man, is like she's 13. And I'm hungry for the research on individuals on the autism spectrum with maybe a variety of different sensory issues and how microdosing could potentially help that. And then also a community I've worked with for years has been 18 to 30-year-olds with schizophrenia, schizotypal, and thought disorders. And typically right now in the psychedelic community, that's an immediate red flag. They're going, hey.
Yeah, but that's because high doses, if I may quote from a schizophrenic, that fucking freaks me out, man, when I do a dose. Oh, how about if you take a microdose? He says, that's really cool. It's really fine for me. I really, it cools me out. This is a paper published by a real PhD in a real journal. Actually, no, that was from an interview about his paper, which
Okay.
is for the two items you've mentioned, autism. And by the way, is your daughter very bright?
Yes, extremely.
Okay, great. So she's what we call high functioning.
Yes.
Terrific. Okay. Fortunately for you, and you read the book too fast. You're going to
I
go
did.
and you're going to read the autism and the schizophrenia comments, but the autism, we're going to tell you in the book that there's a book called Autism. It's from acid to autism or vice versa. I forget what the title is, by Orson. I've lost it, but that's just my mind degenerating as President Nixon would have predicted. But what he did from autism to acid, and what he talks about is high functioning autism kid with the usual problems, which is super smart, zero social skills. And the reason he has zero social skills is because, and this may be this gene that we're talking about, there's no automatic understanding of the subtle cues that we all use to talk to each other. So that you're nodding, I know what that means. You could nod in the same way, and in some way you'd be saying, oh man, you're just trying to, fool me for my daughter, or this is just kind of sweet, I'm going to let you talk, you're not going to knock, but still nodding. Okay. We know how the eyebrows move and what the eye pupil, all that we don't, nobody knows quite how they know it, but we know all that. And your daughter doesn't. Okay. Orson's book is and I recommend this to people that want to understand your daughter and other people, the most wonderful description of the difficulty that she has in relating by having to guess what people mean. Which means when someone says something, she can't respond. She has to say, are they teasing me? Are they liking me? Are they angry with me? Or do they not know me at all? And then she comes up with maybe this will work, or maybe, and they try it. Okay. Now that's a long time in the way human beings work. Orson talks about growing up that way more vividly and more beautifully than any I've read. He also then talks about using high and low doses and how that changed his life. And there's a website of his community. And and just for your question, since you still, in spite of what I'm saying, really like research, he's working with the school in London, the Royal College of London, running studies on psychedelics and people with autism.
Awesome. And
So,
and
right.
and Jim, it is so interesting. It's I think that I became a psychologist in many ways so that people could, it's almost like you need it in order for people to take you seriously in certain ways. And I love that I look radical and I'm covered in tattoos and I got a permanent gold tooth and I'm like, you know what? And I got a PhD.
Right.
But
it's helpful.
yes. And this arena though, I think the frontier for me is things like autism, schizophrenia, even autoimmune, which you mentioned in the book, like
there's a lot more autoimmune than we think.
yes.
Okay, and that's one of the other areas. Again, take a look at microdosing for some of the autoimmune conditions. I've been following someone with MS for some years, and she had MS for 20 years before she started microdosing. And after 3 or 4 years, a lot of different improvements, but she's now I'm no longer microdosing, but I am working on increasing my physical strength and agility. You have to know about MS to know that that doesn't happen. Okay. MS is one of those, it just goes like that. And another fascinating one in there is someone with ALS, which is a brain, which is a damage to the brain at birth. So it's not a condition. This doesn't fit all the medical work. It's just, and um, she also has a PhD in physics. Okay, so it doesn't hit the whole brain. But she's finding that she's developed her own way of working, including high doses, including microdoses, and she keeps making different kinds of progress. So we know, again, why would microdosing help these things? Because most of your system is still working all the time as well as possible. So the fact that if we all measured all of our genes, the chances are that some of your genes and some of our genes wouldn't be terrific, okay, but they may be ones that deal with say premature hair loss or something that doesn't get in the way socially. Or we may have the genes, as people do, where they without they can't stop becoming bigger and more muscular, and then they're treated like a bully when they're bigger than other people, and so forth and so on. Lots of things.
Yeah.
What we're looking at is, are we going to be able to let go of the parts of the medical model that don't work? And are we able to, as you pointed out, add into the healing model what does work? See, I was about to say anything that works, but that's more me, kind of my old hippie self. But what we're looking at is, I don't want to give up on science, because it's got the tools, it's got the new buildings, it's got power, and even the pharmaceutical companies, even though they're going to do what they can to make this beautiful buy of $3 billion fit into the model, which is most profit and not necessarily most benefit. Okay. Reason I asked you about ketamine is J&J has a version of the ketamine molecule that the federal government accepted, generally understood to be inferior to ketamine, but not terrible. And the reason this Eli Lilly took a chance for a couple of $1 billion on the DMT is because this not quite as good ketamine it has a lot more expenses connected to it, and it costs hundreds of dollars. Real ketamine, by the way, costs about $3 or $4 a dose. They made $3 billion. Okay, on a not so good product of a second-rate kind of mind-opening drug. So the possibilities for genuine profits and genuinely benefiting the human race are very high.
Yeah. Jim, I could talk to you for freaking days. I have one final question.
Yes.
And I just want to thank you again for everybody listening. You guys, this is a dream come true. When I started this little podcast, I was just like, had run this youth center, and then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get back on the podcast. I love doing that. I love interviewing people that I respect, and you coming on here is just such a dream come true. But my question is, as we enter this new frontier, we're also going to see the curation and legislation of trainings for therapists and psychologists and licensed professionals to be guides, to be integration coaches, to go do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy trainings. I love your old hippie self, man. Because I think part of it is, we can't let the system define healing for us, and we got to trust ourselves, and we got to take healing back and quit, doning it out and saying that it's out there. We got to find a way to heal ourselves and connect. And so I just wonder some of your thoughts about, the programs that are popping up where it's like, hey, go train to be a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist. Do you think? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing is, see, if you want to learn hand surgery, you don't say to your teacher, how many times did you break your hand? Because that's not the right question. The question is, how many hands have you improved? Okay, but when you're doing someone who's training you on how to use your mind better in a particular way, it's correct to say, what is your personal experience? That's a start. I mean, the book kind of downplays microdose facilitators. That's a term we're coming to use, but that was a couple of years ago. Now I am in touch with a number of microdose facilitators and work closely with one because I learned incredible stuff from her model, wild amount of clients of different sorts. So it's closer, not to, when you say, well, do you know a good dentist? Okay, it's not that. It's more, I'm back in dating. Someone who I might vibe with. Okay, and they say, and she's a dentist. Okay.
Cool.
So we're back to the possibility that there's a rule in economics that if there are two currencies out there, and one is inferior, say paper, and one is not inferior, say gold, that gold vanishes and paper dominates. The inferior dominates. Okay, I'm not an economist. I don't know why. Okay, except you can make a lot more paper easier than you can make more gold. There will be, there are bad trainers. There are bad psychotherapists. There are bad physicians. There are terrible dentists. Okay, and what I'm smiling is there was a wonderful spiritual teacher in maybe the 80s called Muktananda, and Muktananda was very Indian and very spiritual. And at one point, he's addressing like 800 people in Oakland, a big auditorium, and someone says, "Are there any bad gurus?" He says, "Oh, are there any bad doctors? Are there any bad lawyers? Oh, then there are probably bad gurus." And I thought, yes, there are.
Yes.
So when you're working with another human being, regardless of what their degrees or lack of degrees are, the question is two things. One is, how does it feel? And two is, do they have some kind of track record? So if you're getting started, you don't have a track record. But then again, you're more likely to spend more time and more energy with your clients because you don't have that many.
Yes.
So there's very benefits to using people that don't have a lot of experience because they're still listening.
Yes.
And if someone says to you, "I am a," and they give you the name of a Freudian or Jungian or Adlerian or family systems, I find that's a no for me. Any more than someone says, "There are two flavors of ice cream and the others are all weird." Okay, that's just not the way the world is. So I'm very concerned because when you have a theoretical system, you selectively take in information that makes that system look good, and you not pay attention to what makes it look bad. And I have a very early book called Theories of Personality. It's called Personality, actually, and Personal Growth, because that's what people are going for. And you look at Freud, you look at Jung, and you look at transpersonal, and you look at Sufism, and so forth. They all have different kind of parameters of what works. So I actually am more concerned with people who are caught up in their training as if and for all of them, you have to think that's the best training you can get because that's what they got.
Yeah.
And people who can transcend their training, that's probably someone that's worth working with.
Beautifully said, Jim. And it makes me think of, whoever said the quote, "The most important thing is truth," and uncovering that. And it's like, if you look at it, man, Rumi, Hafiz, Khalil Gibran, J. Krishnamurti, Eckhart Tolle, it was the Buddhist kind of view of like, yeah, it isn't the training. It is the experience. It is the journey.
And when Rumi, who was deeply inside Islam, when he died, to his funeral came every other religious group that was within 100 miles.
Yeah.
And what you want is a therapist who's respected by therapists of other persuasions.
Mm.
That's probably a nice way of seeing how it can work. And if you want to get better, you will probably get better no matter who you work with. And if you're someone who says, this happens to young therapists, oh, I've just met you, and this first hour has been, I'm so moved. I'm so grateful that I've come to see you. Have you ever seen any other therapists? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had 8 therapists, and none of them were able to help me, but you can. Okay. If you're a young therapist, you think, hey, man, she sees me. Woo, we're gonna go. If you've been in business like a long time, like 6 months, you say, oh no, because I know in about 2 months, I'm gonna say to some poor devil, I've had 9 therapists. Okay.
Beautifully said, man. It's Don Miguel Ruiz, who I love, says, be careful not to praise yourself too much or berate yourself too much, and be careful of those who praise you too much or berate you. It's like, we're all walking each other home, trying to share knowledge and information and light. Jim, this has been, just fantastic, man. I'm so grateful for you. Any final closing words? As you guys put out these new appendixes and or appendices, do you want people to still reach out to you with their case studies and anecdotal evidence?
I mean, I mentioned only one of about 6 unbelievable situations that we're seeing with microdose. We also want to see people. I mean, actually, I really want people who are microdose failures, because I want to learn something, because there's so damn few. I also recommend to anyone to look at Reddit. There's a subreddit called Microdosing. It has a couple of 100,000 people who've been on and off it, and you can ask questions. That's how. Here's what I learned. Okay, in the book it says for psilocybin about 0.3 of a gram to maybe, or 0.2 of a gram to maybe half a gram. That's the dose for most people. Lady writes in and says, I tried that and it just makes me crazy. But if I take 0.1 of a gram, that's about right. Is there anyone else out there? And all these people chime in that, yeah, this regular dose that, Fadiman is talking about is way too high. And so we now know there's a whole group of people, and one group actually gave themselves a name. They were known to themselves as the microdosers, because they would take 0.1 of a gram or less, or 100th of a gram. They're just amazing. And we also had people, this is more in our own early samples before Reddit, and they said, I took what you suggested, nothing. I took twice what you suggested, nothing. I took 3 times what you said, nothing. When I got to about 5 times, like 2 grams, I had the same kinds of things you're all talking about. I now know to ask them a very simple question. Are you on the spectrum? Because almost always they are the high-functioning autism people. And for reasons I do not know, they often microdose at a much higher level. Meaning they have the effects of a microdose at a much higher level.
Right.
So again, for your daughter, you're going to read the book, I know, and you're going to probably get in touch with him. So it's a wonderful group of people.
Awesome. Well,
So
Jim,
and I'm just delighted that you are, that I know some of your professors from my humanistic transpersonal days, where I'm not quite as affiliated. I'm thrilled with what you do. I'm thrilled that again, Georgia is, in my mind, I was surprised you were able to do what you're doing so far. And you are kind of, for me, what we're all looking for, which is, it's easy to do all this stuff in the Bay Area. It's hard to do it in Georgia. It's hard to do it in Nebraska. It's not hard to do it in most of South America.
Yeah.
And so forth and so on. So we're all, if we're not walking each other home, we're at least walking in the same direction. And it's nice to have friends. And it's nice to have you as a friend.
Jim, You're awesome, brother. And I am a champion of your work and your continued work. And yeah, man, thank you again so much. And hopefully we can stay kind of tuned in and maybe do another one down the road if we need, but very grateful for you, brother.
Take care.
Thanks.
All right.